we're going to get started. Welcome everybody. I'm Caroline. I'm the head of Adult Services and Outreach. And this evening we're welcoming Jane O'Neill from Culturally Curious. This is her company. She has art history education. She is an art history educator. She's worked at the Currier Museum. She's been the executive director of the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen. And then she's also taught at the college level as well. So she is here tonight to talk about Van Gogh. So welcome, Jane.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I am delighted all of you are here tonight because we are in for such a treat. We're going to spend an hour with Vincent van Gogh. We're going to get to know him. We're going to get to know some of his masterpieces tonight, and we can have as much of a conversation about these works as we go along. I love talking about them. I love to hear people's reactions to them too. So I might throw out a question or two along the way, and there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just looking for feedback. It sort of scaffolds us all up to a better level of understanding. So very quickly, before we, when I first got here, I talked with a few people who had been to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam before. Has anybody else been to the Van? Yes, all right. Sounds like something we'll all need to put on our bucket list by the end of the night.
Well, it actually, they've changed it. I don't know when somebody else went, but I went years ago when I was in college, and it was amazing. It was the best museum organization I'd ever seen, and now they've changed it. But anyway, when you went in, it was like a spiral, and you saw his first works, and then it ended with the picture of the wheat field.
Very cool.
So it was very cool. Yeah. I guess they've changed it, but
nice.
I saw it when it was good.
We'll have to go back and measure it against that. I think a few people know too that there's a Van Gogh museum or Van Gogh exhibit at the MFA in Boston right now too, which is well worth it. It's a great show. And maybe a few people saw today too that I came here in my Van Gogh van. So I feel really capable of leading this program tonight. So let me give you a sense in terms of how we'll move through the material today. We've got our first Van Gogh self-portrait giving us a sense of this man. Notice how constricted he looks in this self-portrait here, even though there's these lovely swirling sort of cloud-like elements behind him. We're going to get started with just a quick introduction to the artist. We'll be sort of fleshing out his biography along the way. We'll talk a little bit about what post-impressionism is, because that's how he's categorized as an artist, and it's a term that didn't even exist during his lifetime. So what does it mean to be a post-impressionist? We'll talk about some of his artistic influences as well. And then I kind of broke this down into themes. When you first delve into the life of Vincent van Gogh, there's a lot of foreign terms, there's a lot of foreign places, and I tried to make this as simple and as digestible as possible. And I'm holding you captive till the end. That's when we'll talk about his ear and get the real story, okay? Then we'll wrap up with his death and legacy. So let's get started with our quick introduction to Vincent van Gogh. He was born in 1853, and what we will see is that he had a very short but very productive life. This is one of the only authenticated photographs of him taken during his entire life. He's about 19 years old here. And we'll go back to this image throughout the hour too, because what we'll see is in his self-portraits, he transforms quite a bit. And it's a psychological transformation more than a physical transformation, but it's good to go back to this first reference point. So he's got this Dutch name. He was a Dutch man, but he spent most of his adult life in France. And so we'll be hearing a lot of these French places along the way, but those Dutch roots did have a big influence. We'll touch back on that. So he came from an upper middle class background, but he was kind of rootless as a 20-something-year-old, as many young 20-something-year-old men are. He struggled to kind of find his place. We'll talk a little bit about what he did along the way, but he discovers himself as an artist by the age of 27. So that means he has about a 1-decade-long career. During that career, he produces 900 oil paintings. He was prolific, and especially so in the last half of that decade. And he also produced about 1,100 drawings. So far more prolific than most of the famous artists that you've heard of. And of course, we've all probably heard the fact that he never sold a painting during his lifetime, right? He did sell one painting. It was this one, not one that you might write home about. It's called Red Vineyards, and like many artists who are just emerging, he sold it to a friend for about 400 francs, or about $3,000 in today's money. So not a bad payday, but still a sort of sad and challenged career while he was alive. Now, when we think about his life, I think it's good to go back to this image that he painted of his bedroom. And he painted 3 different versions of this. Think of your own bedroom for a moment. Think of the things, think of the way you've sort of set up displays in your room, what's on the wall, what's beside the bed. This was such a proud moment for Vincent van Gogh when he set up this room, but it's a very simple space, isn't it? There's not much adornment here. And this was a man that was very accustomed to a monastic lifestyle. One of the things that he did as a young man before he became an artist was he worked as like a preacher, like a traveling preacher, and he was actually given room and board for that job. He didn't take it. He chose to essentially sleep in the straw on the floor in a barn, and he gave his lodging to a homeless person. So he was accustomed to a very spare existence, and that's something I always think of when I look at this painting of his bedroom. So here we have another self-portrait of Vincent van Gogh. We're beginning to see his interest and emphasis on gesture and these penetrating stares coming out of these self-portraits. Now, a little bit about his personal life. He actually proposed to 3 different women during his lifetime. Spoiler alert, none of them said yes. He was known to be unstable during his lifetime, and I think for a lot of people he was difficult to be around. But I want to underscore the fact that this is a man who did seek companionship. He wanted a traditional sort of love. I think he even dreamed of having a family of his own someday. So these were things that were always kind of at the back of his mind. While he was alive, he was seen as an artistic failure. He was seen as a madman. He was unstable, like I said, and there's no easy way to diagnose what he had. I've read all sorts of different diagnoses from people who did not treat him, but he might have had epilepsy. He might have had sort of a bipolar disorder. He might have had schizophrenia, which might explain the incident with the ear. Perhaps there were auditory hallucinations associated with that. He certainly had some venereal disease, which might have also contributed to some of the mental illness too. So he was suffering quite a bit during his lifetime. This is a portrait that one of his contemporaries made of him, an artist by the name of Toulouse-Lautrec. And what we see here is Vincent van Gogh turning as far away from his friend who's creating this portrait as possible. Like, you can barely see his face. He's making himself hard to know here. Does anybody know or have a guess as to what is in this glass, this little green liquid here? Absinthe. Absinthe was a very popular drink at the time. It had this liqueur in it and wormwood, which was said as a combination to cause hallucinations, cause just like a drunken stupor. So that's essentially what we see him doing here. And this is a man that did not or could not take care of himself. He would go for 6 months without eating a hot meal. He constantly drank and he constantly smoked. So if he wasn't taking care of himself, who was? And the answer is his brother. His little brother Theo was Vincent van Gogh's biggest champion. He loved his older brother, even when Vincent van Gogh's relationships with his own family were more troubled. So the 2 of them stayed in contact, even if they weren't geographically close. They would write to each other all the time. And apparently Vincent van Gogh never kept a scrap of paper that his brother sent him. But over the years, Theo, his little brother, kept everything that Vincent van Gogh sent him, and those letters have been published. And what's amazing about them is that they have little sketches and descriptions in terms of what he's working on, what he's trying out, how he feels about it. And so it kind of functions as this incredible diary and an insight into the mind of Vincent van Gogh while he was working. So this gives us a little bit of insight into him. We're going to switch gears and we're going to talk a little bit about post-impressionism for a moment and what that means, why he's lumped into this category, how we understand it. So we start off with impressionism, we go to post-impressionism. Right here on the left is a painting by Claude Monet, an Impressionist painting by Claude Monet. And Impressionism was like the 1860s, the 1870s. Post-Impressionism came about 20 years later. This isn't Vincent van Gogh over here, this is Georges Seurat. So what the Impressionists did was they started executing these kind of sketchy paintings, working rapidly, showing evidence of their brushwork. They're not trying to blend it in and make it perfect and smooth. Really interested, if we look at this tree trunk here, in momentary effects of light and shadow. And at first, of course, it was rejected. People hated this. They thought it was like the downfall of humanity to be painting like this. And then after about 10 years or so, it was fully accepted and championed. And so by the time you get to artists like Van Gogh or Seurat over here, they're thinking Impressionism is real, it's here to stay, but how do you teach it? How do you make it something a little bit more substantial than just this idea of like, go outside and work quickly, try to capture what you see. So artists like Seurat and Van Gogh over here try to add a little structure to Impressionism. And you can see it really well in this famous painting from the Art Institute of Chicago. So what Seurat does in his case is, instead of like these quick kind of loosey-goosey brushstrokes that we see with Monet, he uses very controlled dots of paint. He essentially creates a pixelated painting. And in this case, it's on a grand scale. And one of the things that he's really interested in, besides the control of the application of the paint, is the colors that he puts together. And I think you can see this best maybe along the painted edge of the painting, because he changes the color of the frame according to what colors are next to it. And what he's thinking about here is the color wheel and color theory. So the idea here is, if you're using like a blue-violet, you want a nice yellow or orange on the other side of it. And then those two colors vibrate together in a really beautiful way. A great way to think of this is think of like a really nice container of strawberries at the grocery store, like this beautiful red, and it's always in that kind of mint green carton because it looks so good, right? There's an understanding of color theory at play there. So how does this relate to Vincent van Gogh? What we will see is he is trying to use a little bit of structure so that he's not just using this haphazard sort of wild approach that the Impressionists had been using. So we've got another Monet over here, an image of a garden, and of course his brushwork is varied all over the place, but you know, he's using one stroke to create these flowers, a different kind of stroke to create the sky here. But look at how intentional Vincent van Gogh's brushwork is in this garden scene over here. Essentially every flower, every color has a particular kind of brushstroke that goes with it. So he is really trying to be as deliberate as possible in making a painting like this. This isn't going out into a field and making a haphazard work very quickly. This is him being methodical and careful. And we don't often associate those traits with somebody who is really unstable. Now, just a quick note about some other influences, and we'll see them throughout the program too. Vincent van Gogh, like the Impressionists and all of his contemporaries, was fascinated by Japanese art. In particular, these Japanese woodblock prints that had just been flooding France at this time. So this was like a whole new visual language that they were seeing. They were galvanized by it. You might have seen this painting down at the MFA in Boston. This is a painting by Claude Monet of his wife, all dressed up in a kimono. She's got about a dozen Japanese fans behind her. So this is the sort of thing that these artists were collecting. What we'll see is Vincent van Gogh had them up on his walls too, and they influenced his artwork quite a bit. So you can see this stretch of blossoms up here at the top of this print, and Vincent van Gogh painted this picture of these almond blossoms when he found out that his little brother was having his first child, and his little brother named that baby Vincent. So of course, Vincent van Gogh has to paint something in his honor. And stretched out across this monochromatic background, looks very modern, right? But it's also very Japanese too. So we're going to turn our attention now to some of these big themes that Vincent van Gogh took on as an artist. And I should mention that as an artist, he was essentially entirely self-taught. He didn't go to school. He didn't get formal training. One of the things that he did was he just inhaled, he like ingested prints of one particular artist named Jean-Francois Millet. And Millet had been working in the 1850s in France, and his fascination was realism. He depicted farmers, peasants, this idea of subject matter that artists never took on. You know, who wanted to buy a picture of a poor person and hang that in their house? But Millet took that on, and then Vincent van Gogh, this is what touched him. This was a man who started off like as a minister, right? Preaching to poor people. So he would take these Millet images and update them. And we can see that he's using this very controlled gesture in order to apply the paint color here. And then once again, he's thinking about color theory too. So we can see how he's using this almost like acidic yellow over here to balance out some of that purple. So it's a topic that he's passionate about, and it's a way for him to explore this color theory. He does these images of sowers, peasants literally just spreading seeds around fields like this so many times, and it's almost always the same kind of color combination and the same figure kind of striding forward because he was so influenced by Millet's work. Notice like this bright sun over here. We're going to see a lot of celestial events tonight too. Here is another sower. You can see he's just dropping his seeds over here. We've got this strong diagonal, almost like a silhouette of this tree stretching across this composition. And this is a little bit of that Japanese influence coming into play too. Now, here's another really important Millet painting, important in the history of art and important to Vincent van Gogh too. This is a painting that he did right around the 1850s called The Gleaners. And if you've never seen this painting before, it might haunt you for the rest of your life. Because what we're looking at here is a field that has already been harvested. And these three women are the poorest of the poor, but they let them go in and pick up the scraps that have been left behind. And so here they are doing this back-breaking labor here just to provide a subsistence existence. And you see, like every time I look at this picture, I get sympathy back pain just thinking about it. Look at how Millet has positioned this figure so that her head doesn't even break the horizon line here. You feel the weight of the world on these people. And that is exactly what Vincent van Gogh takes up in the early years of his career. He's so empathetic to the plight of the working poor. So there's a lot of images of people hunched over, harvesting potatoes. And these are dark images. We don't see the color theory here. Really, for the first 5 years of his career, he was creating these kind of somber, almost muddied pictures. And believe it or not, by the middle of this decade-long career that he had, this was considered his first masterpiece. And I don't think anybody would really write home about it, right? I don't think this is anyone's favorite Vincent van Gogh painting. It's called The Potato Eaters. And in his mind, he wanted to make all of these figures look as kind of rough and as coarse as possible. He thought they were, so there's like this beautiful humility in the fact that they cultivated their own food and they're taking in this simple meal together. And he thought these were pious people. He was championing them with an image like this. But of course, again, it's dark, it's ugly. It's not the kind of picture that I think most people are expecting or looking for when they think of Vincent van Gogh. So we'll end this section on peasants with this image here that I always find kind of heartbreaking, because once again he's looking at these prints by that earlier artist Millet. This is an image called First Steps, where we can see a farmer has laid down his tool here and his little toddler is being brought out through the gate by his mother and is about to take first steps over to dad. And Vincent van Gogh has faithfully updated that scene, added in, the wonderful gesture here. You get this sense of texture in this field, beautiful colors here. And you know that this man aspired to this idea of that kind of familial love. This was something he sought for in his own life. So let's take a look at some of his still life painting too, because he works across all of these genres. I can pause too if there's any image that anybody wants to go back to or has a question about. That's fine too. We'll keep going. All right. So when we think of still life painting, like I said, Vincent van Gogh was a Dutchman. He came from this incredible Dutch tradition of still life painting going back centuries, and this is a tradition that he would have been familiar with. So back in the 1600s, you had Dutch still life painters who were creating these hyper-realistic scenes, sometimes sort of dark and shadowy scenes like what we see here with like the piles of books. And then there was this particular strength of floral paintings in the Dutch tradition too, where they showed this incredible bouquet that's like filled with bugs and insects and that sort of thing. So when Vincent van Gogh first gets started on still life painting, again, it's a little bit clunky, right? But he is thinking of his Dutch roots because one of his first still life paintings, a little dark, a little muddy, but it has those wooden shoes in it, right? So he's thinking, how do I navigate this? How can this all come together? And over the course of time, he turns his attention primarily to floral painting, in part because that was a very cheap model. This was a man who couldn't really interact with women. Like, he's not gonna pay a woman to pose for him because he was just so awkward and stressed about that interaction. But he said he could afford a bouquet of flowers. So again, his first shot at this, or one of his early shots at this, there's no comparison here. Again, I don't think anybody wants to take home his painting of the vase with honesty. But right around the 1885, 1886, Vincent van Gogh has a breakthrough. And it happens in part because he moves with his brother to Paris. And for the first time in years, Vincent van Gogh now has stability in his life, financial and emotional stability. And he is literally blossoming with these flowers that he's painting. All of this color comes into his color palette, and he's creating these really appealing pictures like the hollyhocks and the zinnias here, the gladioli. And so there's experiments here in color, and experiments where he's like really playing with gesture in this kind of textured background. Look how he's adding in almost like a checkerboard patterning around this vase and in the background here. And he's kind of searching for something, and he's almost there. And then we see these sunflowers, and it's like, aha, he has found his solution, right? There's so much satisfaction in seeing these flowers as like the culmination of these experiments. So when he started painting these sunflowers, he knew he had landed on something special. He wrote to his brother, "The sunflower is mine." This was like a celebration. He painted about 12 different versions of sunflowers, and like a good Dutch artist, he painted them in every stage from kind of bud to blossom to decay, like we see over here. Sometimes it's an opportunity to explore color theory, and sometimes he just went all in on the yellow. And I believe that this was like a certain shade of yellow that hadn't yet been commercially available until this moment. So he's kind of seizing on this incredible opportunity. One of the things that I love about this is he said to his brother too, that to him, the sunflower represented gratitude. So the next time you want to say thank you to someone, bring them a sunflower and tell them about Vincent van Gogh. Now, he was at the time living with his frenemy, another artist named Paul Gauguin. We'll learn a little bit more about him along the way. Paul Gauguin actually painted this image of Vincent van Gogh at work at his easel painting those sunflowers. So it's kind of cool to see that from a different perspective. Vincent van Gogh saw this painting and he hated it. He said, "Paul Gauguin has made me look like a madman." Maybe that was accurate, who knows? So he continued to work at making floral still lifes really right up until the end of his career. This is this is sort of like another spoiler alert, but I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the fact that Vincent van Gogh spent an extended amount of time, about a year, living in an insane asylum after this incident with his ear. And this is one of the paintings that he created while he was there. Beautiful bouquet of irises. I love that he has some of them spilling out of the edge over there. It adds this kind of question, this movement, this interest to what would otherwise be a pretty safe topic, right? And of course, with the colors that he's chosen here, it's right across, these colors right across from each other on the color wheel. So he's being really intentional about how these colors will work together. And these colors truly do just sing when they are together. Think of that the next time you got to put an outfit together. Think of an iris color. Here's one more of his floral still lifes that I wanted to share with you. I think this one is in the collection at Harvard. And he painted this right before he was getting out of that asylum. The color theory is a little bit off here because these were pink roses that color pink has kind of faded over time. Art historians sort of like this kind of breezy background that he has, and they suggest that this could be sort of evidence of him looking forward to a sense of freedom, leaving this asylum. Okay, so he's done some still lifes. He's also done some landscapes, and we don't necessarily think of some of his most famous paintings as landscapes per se, but once again, I just want to hit home the fact that he's familiar with Dutch traditions. The Dutch have this incredible history in terms of landscape painting. This particular Dutch landscape is a masterwork that's actually just over at the Courier Museum of Art. This is a watercolor that Vincent van Gogh did with the same kind of dead tree marking this path that leads to a city in the background. There is this sense of renewal and rebirth with these tiny branches growing out of these trees and a kind of a religious overtone here. But as much as he was influenced by the Dutch, it's really Impressionism that he's responding to. So we've got a classic Impressionist landscape over here, something that would have been done about 20 years before he was working, and then kind of Vincent van Gogh's answer to the same thing. And we see that order, that structure, those careful choices in his landscape. This Impressionist landscape, again, sort of dashed off. It's about gesture, it's about rapid execution. And Vincent van Gogh is like laying in color carefully. He's making sure every single tree, every single field of wheat here is laid in with this exact and precise gesture. Here's one more. Sure.
Go back to.
Yeah.
Do the houses almost look like Matisse? They're sort of blocky.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's like a lot of interplay. I look at this too, and I think of Cézanne a little bit. There's a lot of interplay between these ideas. They're kind of all moving towards like coming to a head right around the beginning of the 20th century. So a lot of the things that he's exploring, certainly artists like Cézanne and Matisse would have had on their minds too. Here's just another one of these landscapes. I love this color blue, and I just love the way he's kind of used it in almost every element in the foreground, the middle ground, the background, the sky, to create this kind of unified scene. This is called Peach Trees in Blossom. And this is another picture that to me just kind of has this orderliness to it, but it also just kind of sings. It's a terrific landscape. Now, like those scenes of peasants, Vincent van Gogh was looking at other artists and how they painted landscape. This is Millet once again. And so these are images that he certainly would have been exposed to. Really dramatic sort of night scenes. I think this is maybe a storm with like a double rainbow over here. Here's a night scene with a really large moon hanging right over the horizon. And so painting the night became a particular focus for Vincent van Gogh. And what an exciting time to paint the night, because all of a sudden you have gaslight and you have cities that can be illuminated in a brand new way. Like, think of this little scene right here in the 1880s. What would it have looked like just a couple decades earlier? People wouldn't have been out congregating this way. So Vincent van Gogh is thinking about the colors of the night. And once again, we see this beautiful combination of the yellows and this deep, dark blue. So he's writing to his brother about this. He's kind of struggling through this, but he says, you know, sometimes this color combination allows him to achieve this sort of vibration between these colors that is just so satisfying. This little scene right here with the stars shining down on this river. Notice the couple walking in the foreground. Again, Vincent van Gogh was a romantic. This is like the life he wanted. Let me just double check my notes. I believe it's Starry Night over the Rhone. Okay. Yeah. So this would have been right around the corner from where he was living at the time. But we see him working towards something and something important. And just like those sunflowers, when he arrives at the solution of the starry night, there's that, there's this satisfaction. There's this sense that he has arrived at a solution to painting the night, right? Of course, Vincent van Gogh thought that this was a failure. He thought, this painting doesn't even work. Now, this is a painting we've all seen a zillion times, right? My kids learned about it when they were in preschool. Does anybody want to share any sort of reaction that they have to this work? Because sometimes we see it so often, we become sort of almost like immune to really looking at it. But we have a chance now to kind of feast our eyes on this painting. Maybe there's an idea that you carry around about this work, or maybe just sitting here with it, you see it in a new way. Does anybody want to share what this painting makes them think of? Go ahead.
My boys were at the middle school here in town. They had a really good art teacher, and they studied Van Gogh. They studied this particular print. Then they were all told to recreate their version of it, and she had them hanging in the stairwell. And there were so many comments. When I see this now, I think of, because I worked in that school, going up and down the stairway for like a month, and so many common, but they were all so different too. So that evokes some memories of what my children and this art teacher had done.
I love that.
That's why I really like that.
I love that. I think this is a work that does get reinterpreted so often too. I think I even see something on the shirt over here, maybe a little bit. But we almost use it as something to help us, as like a lens through which we can understand the world today too. It's like we continue to reinterpret it, and it continues to like have this added meaning to us. Any other thoughts or observations?
Your thoughts went back to middle school for your children, right? My thinking is, I wonder what it would look like today, when we have so much light.
Yeah,
And I don't know that it would be that dark.
Right.
In any place.
Right.
So would we still see that, or would he see something more yellow or more white? It would be curious to see what he might do today.
Because they only had the gas lights at that time.
Which had that yellowy hue,
Right. I love even thinking about that, thinking about how the original location might have changed since then. Like, is this like this precious moment that's been captured in time because, there's so much artificial light now. And then the brilliance of those stars, or maybe some of them are planets, and the moon there, I mean, what an extraordinary thing he's conveying here, right?
I just love the movement in the sky.
Yeah.
It's like, is it windy that night?
Right. There is this incredible sense of movement, right? It's always kind of reminded me of that painting of like the famous wave, right? Although somebody pointed out to me that this sense of movement almost becomes kind of like a knot right there at the center of the painting. So we think of it as like these rolling hills, right? And this sense of atmosphere moving or windiness, but it kind of curls back in on itself a little bit here too, which is interesting. Any last thoughts or observations here? I think there's a particular fascination around this work because it was created while Vincent van Gogh was institutionalized. And I think for a while, people thought, is this, the view of the world through the eyes of a madman? Is this how he sees the world? There's also a little bit of a darkness to this painting. This giant cypress tree over here, this kind of flame-like form, which takes up almost like a third of the painting, is a tree that's associated with cemeteries, especially in France. The other major vertical element in the picture is this church spire here, right? That kind of looks like a sewing needle in some ways. It is so skinny and so tall, and it just breaks that horizon line, sort of unifying this swirling, ethereal night sky with what is down below here. Now, art historians have spilled a lot of ink talking about what is happening in this picture. And it's really, I mean, it's really all our best guess, because Vincent van Gogh didn't say, this is exactly what was in my head as I painted it. I think he was probably thinking about color theory, right? But I mean, there are art historians out there that talk about this constellation of the night sky as like representing a pregnant woman giving birth. This would be like her crown up here. I mean, there's so many different ways to see this. What I'd like to show you is what the view from his room actually looked like. And it's a good reminder that this is this beautiful painting that is known worldwide. It's one of the most famous images on the planet. It's a construction, right? The other fact is that he didn't paint it in his room. He had the view from his room, maybe was inspired by that view, but he had a studio space on the first floor of the asylum, and he painted during the day. So that's where he would have put all of this together. It is kind of fun to think about the texture of this painting, because when you get up close to it, it almost looks like he squirted the paint out directly from the tubes, right? It's almost like a tube of toothpaste, and you can see there's almost like this sculptural quality to it when you get close to it. Now, like I said, we can only sort of speculate as to what is going on there, but I think there is this incredible sense of harmony, of rhythm to a piece like this, the color theory working so well here. What I'd like to do is just give you a quick peek sort of where things go from here, because Vincent van Gogh, of course, painted that in an asylum. He then leaves the asylum, but what we tend to see in those final months of his life are these very dark paintings. Not always, but there tends to be a lot of these deep, dark blue skies. They remind me of like a storm coming in on a summer day in New Hampshire. I have to say, this is one of my favorite Van Gogh paintings, because this church that he's painted from behind with this dark sky above it, there's something sort of anamorphic to me. It almost looks like this giant spider that could get up and walk away. There's so much energy to this scene. Now, some of you, and I think you mentioned this painting when you went through the museum as a spiral, this is oftentimes attributed as being the very last painting that he did. And we can see we've come a long way from those strict little garden paths that he had been painting before. The brushwork is really loose. It's almost wild. It's almost out of control. This is a wheat field with these crows rising up out of the wheat. We can see these varied paths in front of us. Something has been disturbed. The sky is this dark, sort of foreboding color. You really get a sense that there is sort of like a darkness overhanging the artist at this point. Some of you might have heard of the Vincent van Gogh biopic, Lust for Life, starring Kirk Douglas, and there's a famous scene in the movie where he's painting this, and this is the result is sort of the end of his life. But this is not, in fact, the painting that he had on his easel on his last day. So we're getting close to that story. Very quickly, we're going to touch on portraits and self-portraits, because he's so famous for this, and this is what the show at the MFA is all about right now too. There are very few people that Vincent van Gogh could paint other than himself, because he was a challenging person to be around. The person that we're looking at here is named Père Tanguay, and the reason he had a relationship with Vincent van Gogh is because he owned an art supply shop, and so they naturally had some point of connection. We see this kind of rapid evolution from a naturalistic portrait in 1886, something that looks sort of standard, sort of academic, to within 2 years, something that looks strikingly modern, something that is all about these vivid colors, the Japanese prints surrounding him in the background, and this sort of novel approach, this sort of strict frontality to this particular portrait here. So we see, again, this rapid evolution in Vincent van Gogh's approach to making pictures in general, but certainly with portraiture. Now, there is a family that he did end up getting close to, and this is kind of the focus of that show at the MFA. He became very close with his postman, and this was the wife of his postman, who we can see he painted several times over, almost always with the same, if not like a similar color palette, but he is exploring that color theory there with that red kind of orange carpet and the contrast that it created with the green. Now this was a woman, and I should mention that he painted some of these before the ear incident and some of them after the ear incident. This is a woman that is oftentimes sort of thought to be like a calm, loving, sort of affectionate presence in his life, almost like a maternal presence. These are paintings that are known as la berceuse, which means the lullaby. And you can see that there's a little rope in her hand in each one of these because she had just had a baby and the rope was attached to a cradle. So as he's painting this picture of her, she was actually comforting her own child. Now, of course, museums all want these pictures. And I'll leave it to you. You're the curator, which one of these you would go for, but you'll never guess which one the subject of these paintings wanted for herself. She wanted this face, that color skin. It's hard to believe, right? Not the most flattering color palette, but I guess it's better than the yellow face, right? One other figure in Van Gogh's life that he painted at least 2 times here was his own doctor. After he left the asylum, he was treated by this man named Dr. Gachet. And they ended up being sort of kindred spirits. But at first, when Vincent van Gogh met this doctor, he wrote to his brother, "This is the blind leading the blind." This guy's more depressed than I am, essentially. And we can see he's sort of in like this classic thoughtful pose here. Vincent van Gogh described this pose as being sort of like the melancholy expression of our time. So he's really sort of tapping into that aspect of who Dr. Gachet was. But they had a lot in common beyond their mental health status. Dr. Gachet was an artist himself. We can see he's pictured here with foxglove, this beautiful kind of purple color here, which has an extract that was sometimes used to treat mania and epilepsy at the time. So this might be a reference to his treatment too. But of course, the person that Vincent van Gogh painted most was himself. He came from this Dutch tradition where artists like Rembrandt painted himself, dozens of times. We can see Vincent van Gogh in an early self-portrait over there when his paintings were still sort of dark and muddy. He went to a museum and he saw this painting of Rembrandt and he said he would have given 10 years of his life just to stay in front of this painting for 2 weeks. So there's really something about this painting that he gravitated towards, and maybe just the idea of capturing your own likeness too. I think that this is probably his most joyful, his most upbeat self-portrait here. We can see that his face is really round. We can see that he's celebrating the fact that he is a professional artist here. He's got his palette and brushes and his easel. I think this is just maybe 5 or so years after the photograph here, but he still looks like a young man. He doesn't look as haggard as we will see he gets. And like I said, he changes dramatically over the course of his short career. And these self-portraits aren't a documentation of a physical transformation, but a psychological one. And that he lays bare for all of us to see sort of that struggle in his paintings, sometimes with like wild and bold gestures, but we can see his actual face, the shape of his head transforming quite a bit too. These are from 1887. The following year, he's creating these self-portraits with almost like this wild striping to them. Note the green lines on the cheeks here and just above the eyes. There's even some like yellow and green lines cross-hatching across the nose here. There's, if a painting's going to vibrate, it's probably these pictures here. There's so much dynamism and energy to the application of each brushstroke. And then as we get closer to the end of his life, we do see this kind of pinched posture, this constricted form, somebody who seems, particularly in this image from the Musée d'Orsay, somebody that seems constrained. And then this is a self-portrait that he created while he was at the asylum in the final months of his life. And we can see at this point such a dramatic transformation in his life, going from about 19 years old to about 36, 37 years old. So so it's sort of heartbreaking to see some of this, and he struggled so much even while he was at this asylum. Sometimes in his darkest days he would ingest paint, and he would ingest paint thinner. So he was, I think some of this physical transformation was real to a certain extent towards the end of his life. One of the paintings that art historians sort of argue over whether or not it's his final self-portrait, it is one of the last for sure. He's shaved off his beard, and he's actually even included like little cuts on his face from shaving his beard. I feel like he's looking so much more optimistic here. He painted this one and gave it to his mother. So we can see how he really explores the nature of self and our interior lives in his self-portraits here. So we'll explore now that famous story of the ear, and the fact that there's a lot of controversy around the theory of the ear these days. It all started when Vincent van Gogh wanted to start an artist's commune, like an ideal living situation with all these other artists. Nobody wanted to live with him. He was an unstable man. But his brother said, essentially, to this fellow artist, Paul Gauguin, I'll pay you to go live with my brother for a little while. You know, you guys can make some art together in the south of France. So they lived in this little yellow house here. That little yellow house that Vincent van Gogh painted is where he had this bedroom of his, where he was so excited and so proud for this fellow artist to come and live with him. And he's, you know, set up the art on his wall, and he's set up these chairs. So in advance of these two artists living together, they sent self-portraits to each other to kind of like introduce themselves. This is the image that Vincent van Gogh sent to Paul Gauguin, and vice versa. This is now in the collection of the Harvard Art Museums, and actually later Vincent van Gogh had written an inscription to Paul Gauguin that was later painted out. Paul Gauguin took the painting and sold it after this whole ear incident. Vincent van Gogh was terrified by this painting. He, where Paul Gauguin sort of references Les Miserables here, and he said, he looks like a criminal and there's like no escape from this. So these two men lived with each other for about 60, 65 days, one fall in 1888. And by all accounts, well, it was a very productive time for both of them. They're generating some of their best known paintings, they're challenging each other, but by all accounts, Vincent van Gogh did not have an off switch, and he was a very challenging person for Paul Gauguin to live with. So one night they were sort of squabbling, and things got heated, and Paul Gauguin supposedly left the house. And Vincent van Gogh ran out after him with a razor blade and said, I'm going to cut myself, and then ran back to the house. When Paul Gauguin later returned the next day, he found Vincent van Gogh lying in a pool of blood. Now, the way the story actually unfolded is that Vincent van Gogh severed some of, all of his ear, and then took it to a brothel and handed it to his favorite courtesan and said, keep this with you, it's precious. There's even a news account of what happened that day. I won't bore you by reading it, but essentially it says, you know, we found this madman and he was near death and he was rushed to the hospital. So, so for years, people debated what actually happened to the ear. And for a long time, I think everybody just imagined that the entire ear was severed. And then art historians came back and they said, no, it was just his earlobe, which I find really hard to believe because we've all seen the self-portraits with the bandaged ear. That's more than an ear piercing. So we actually do have the doctor's diagram from what happened. And he severed from the top down and basically just left a little bit of earlobe. So that is why when Vincent van Gogh started painting self-portraits with the bandaged ear, trying to show his doctors that he was doing okay. You know, I'm wearing my warm coat, I'm feeding myself, I'm making sure I'm tending to this wound. That's what these self-portraits are really about. That's why there's so much bandage there, because that was a pretty significant wound. So it wasn't right after that he went to the asylum. There was actually several months in between, and that was still a very unstable time for him. In fact, his neighbors at that little yellow house took up a petition to get rid of him. He was that disturbed. So with his brother's help, he ends up at an asylum called Saint-Remy, and he had probably more freedom there than any other patient. Actually, there were hardly any other patients. This is his painting of the inside of the asylum, and this is his actual bedroom there. So he had a studio, he could move around. It was, by and large, a very good place for him. When he first arrived there, one of the paintings that he created was this famous image of the irises, and he called it a lightning rod for his mental illness. He said if he could just keep working on it, he would be okay. So this is a man who could like churn out a painting every 36 hours, basically. He worked on this one for like 2 to 3 weeks. I just love how like animated every single one of these petals are. There's just this liveliness to them, and you could certainly make some assumptions about how lonely or isolated he felt because of that one white iris there. So I will say there's a little bit of a question as to whether or not he was the one responsible for his ear. There's some thinking out there, speculation, that this fight with Paul Gauguin ended up with Paul Gauguin attacking Vincent van Gogh. Apparently, Paul Gauguin was a master fencer, and he walked around with a sword. And when he saw what happened to Vincent van Gogh, he said, "That's a clean cut." So,
Say that again, what was that?
he said, "That's a clean cut." He also produced a lot of art on his own afterwards that was like a meditation on what had happened to Vincent van Gogh. And I should mention, he got on a train right after that and they never saw each other again. So you never know. There's still even a little bit of controversy about his death. So after Vincent van Gogh eventually leaves that little yellow house, he goes to the asylum for about a year, and then he has a few months outside of the asylum where he's living in a little town on the outskirts of Paris. He's being treated by Dr. Gachet, and he's living in the attic of this little like restaurant hotel here. And every day he would go out to the fields, bring his paints, and he would make a painting. He would write to his brother about how he was feeling. There were like exciting things in his future, but he was also, you know, struggling with depression. So nobody really knows what was his state of mind. But we do know that one day he went out into a field, and he didn't return at the regular time back to that little hotel. He ended up returning at 9 p.m. with a gunshot wound to his stomach, which is an awful way to die. It took him 30 hours to die, and they couldn't find a surgeon to help him. He was being attended to by his brother and by 2 other doctors, but it was basically a slow, painful infection. Dr. Gachet was there, and Dr. Gachet actually made this deathbed portrait of Vincent van Gogh. And I think this is the ear that Vincent van Gogh had severed. So that's probably the only time you'll ever get to see that there. This is a print, so the image is reversed. So Vincent van Gogh passes away at the age of 37. On his deathbed, here he is like in agony. He was saying things like, "Will the sadness ever end?" He was, it seemed as though he was ready for this. 6 months after he died, his little brother Theo died as well. They're buried alongside each other in that small town outside of Paris. And we actually have Theo's wife and her son Vincent to thank for Vincent van Gogh's entire legacy. They managed the art, they managed the legacy. The nephew helped to found the museum that's there today. There's been a lot of speculation in recent years about Vincent van Gogh's death. There was this major monograph that was written about Vincent van Gogh, and there was a footnote that suggested maybe he was murdered. And everybody went crazy after that. There was a group of teenagers that had been essentially bullying Vincent van Gogh while he was living in that small town, and a teenager who had an unreliable gun, and he sort of thought of himself as a cowboy. It does make you wonder why he would have chosen to have shot himself in the stomach. Nobody ever found his easel or his paintings from that day, and nobody ever found the gun. This gun was found in a field, supposedly, close by. just a couple of years ago. Nobody knows if it was even associated with the death of Vincent van Gogh, but it was auctioned off for tens of thousands of dollars because people speculated that it was. And of course, since then, his legacy, his reputation has only grown and expanded. There's these immersive experiences that you can go to, some good,
really good.
some okay. You can buy anything with Vincent van Gogh's artwork on it, cards, calendars, whatever. There's a movie called Loving Vincent, which is like a little movie about his life, and every single cell of the painting of the movie is hand painted by like 150 artists. They did 65,000 cells. And of course, the Vincent van Gogh Museum is like the best attended museum in the world in terms of a museum that's dedicated to a single artist. They get more than, I think, 2 million visitors a year. This painting over here recently sold for, I think in today's money, about $123 million. If you look at the list of the most expensive paintings on the planet, the number of Vincent van Gogh paintings on that list add up to more than $1 billion today. We can't get enough of him, right? This is the artist who only sold one work in his entire life. And I think there's a tragedy to the fact that we use this shorthand joke to talk about him. I think it's actually, it does him such a disservice because this is a man who really did struggle throughout his life. And the end result was that he created these absolutely gorgeous paintings that still resonate with us today. So at the very least, we should respect that struggle because what it produced still moves us today. So I'll end there for now. I welcome any questions or comments you have about Vincent van Gogh. Thank you.
I have a question on the scale of the paintings. Did he have an average size painting that he usually worked with?
That is a really good question. I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head. They tend to be smaller. I mean, I can't even think of one that's like 3 by 4. They tend to be a more modest size. But I don't know, maybe for anybody who's been to the museums, if anything stood out to you. Yeah. And that's such a good question because I'm sure there was probably like a standard size canvas for the time too. I'm sorry, I just don't know the dimensions, but they do tend to be something like maybe like a 2 by 3. Was there another comment over here? Okay. All right. Well, again, I really appreciate you guys spending your evening with me. Thank you so much for coming out.
One of the fun things about the expo is they create, there's a whole section sort of exploring his art before you go into it.
Yeah.
And they have a replica of the room.
Yeah.
And you can go and sit in it and have a picture.
That's so cool. I love it. Well, hopefully now you think of him in a new way when you go out in the world. Thanks, everyone.
My question is about the signatures.
Yeah.
Like, I saw a few pictures, and I just saw over the weekend a couple.
Yeah.
And that strictly said Vincent on it, but most of his are not signed, like that one up there.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Oh, that one has Vincent on the edge of the frame.
Does it?
But I don't know if there's like a real rhyme or
there.
reason.
Okay, you're right.
I love that I get the laser pointer. To go all around the room. Yeah, I mean, I don't see a signature on this one. So I don't know if there was like a real rhyme or reason to what he signed. Well, we do know he loved those sunflowers so much, so that might have been why he chose to attach the name to it. And this one he felt like was the failure. The dud, right?
Great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.